Hello, welcome back, everyone, to America's Future podcast today with Ruben Denson. I've had him on the podcast, once before. The first couple of episodes I did, he was on my podcast, and now we're back today. And today we're just going to talk about, oh, yeah, and I forgot to mention that he is a communications major, so today we are going to talk about something that he is very much relevant to him. And today we're going to talk about what it looks like when you're having a conversation with someone who likely will disagree with you, and how to, speak truth to them, but in a charitable manner, and also in a way that allows them to be receptive to what you have to say. So, Ruben, what does that look like when you're having that conversation? What does it look like? We I remember when we talked about this in the past, and what can we just go over that with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be back on the podcast, Timothy. So, again, thank you for having me. It's always a joy to speak with yourself and just gain your insight. Um, Today, we're going over a very, very real topic, one that we could all relate to as members of our family, of our circle of friends, of our community. And in these circles, we experience a lot of disagreement, especially today in what I would consider the post-COVID era. There's a lot of there's a lot of disagreement in our world, and it's heightened by just the polarization that we see on the news, social media, all kinds of broadcasting has really shed its light on how difficult it is to navigate certain conversations, especially in the world of politics. But we could actually learn something from people, even those that we may disagree with, very seriously. And this is something I've really given a lot of thought to more recently because I've taken a moment to step back and ask yourself for your insight, and just keeping up with the news at a more basic level. I know I brought that up in previous podcasts that it's not something that I do all the time. I try not to make the social media space my own, um, but I still like to be informed and know that I'm not uh, neglecting my duties as a citizen of this country, as a layperson, and as a contributing member of my family and society at large by being disinformed, or excuse me, misinformed or ignorant to the events that are happening on a daily basis. So you're asking specifically about how this looks in our world, in our time. This looks like getting through Thanksgiving dinner without a complete, train wreck of a conversation, right? We have a lot of people that have great ideas and they take stances that are difficult in the public sphere, but they don't communicate it most effectively because there are so many emotions that are attached to these positions, and so we have to learn to disengage our our fight response and not fly away, but try to reach a place of understanding. And this is not always easy to do when we find ourselves just hoping for that person that we disagree with, um, to see the truth, to recognize their where they've gone wrong. But we could actually do this by asking questions. And so the strategy that so many have taken on of just fiery rebuttal, it's not the most effective, I think, for navigating the difficult waters that we find ourselves in today in our climate, especially with so much happening. Um, Again, in the news, I know lots is challenging our country still, even under a new administration, and so we just have to find new and exciting ways to build bridges and form human connectivity instead of disengaging with that integral part of who we are as people in society, but especially in America, which is truly destined to be a nation of unity. And that doesn't always have to look like perfect agreement, but just I don't know, a respect for another person, even if they're difficult and their personality is challenging.
So, right, okay. So if I were to say something like, "Oh, well, I know we had this conversation before, but on abortion or whatever, like I
Mhm.
think that it's okay to have an abortion in these certain circumstances."
Mhm.
And or we even talked about the other day, you and I, about the being gay or whatever, and I think that it's okay if you're gay, and that's okay. You're unique, and that's there's nothing wrong with that. And you went about telling me how you would speak to that person and speak truth to them, but you did it in a way that was able for that person to be receptive of your response.
Yes.
And so, can you go over? So I'm just gonna make a comment, and you want to go, walk, like, just start saying exactly how you would go through it
Yes.
with that person. You want to do that?
Sure. Absolutely. That works.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Well, hi, Ruben. I'm Timothy, and I think that my friend over here, he's a very good friend of mine, but we tend to think that it's okay for people to live out the same sex lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with that because they're loving each other, and it's there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay, and God doesn't have a problem with it.
Well, Timothy, it's great that you have recognized that God is an integral part of this friendship with this other person, and I think that because you and I have a shared understanding of who God is, at least at a basic level, to we could speak to our experience as Christians, right? So I am a Catholic Christian. Faith is number one in my life, and I recognize that there's a great need for us in our lives as Catholics to identify sin and to allow God to step into that sinful state we find ourselves in. And while you may have this opinion, it's important to ask yourself this question, and this is what I'm going to ask. Do you think that this homosexual lifestyle that you're living in is really leading you toward Christ? And if so, what makes you believe that? What makes you say that?
Well, I think that it is because we love each other, and I see that love as helping me get to God, and we
Hmm.
as as friends, we and through our love we are helping each other get to God.
Hmm. Well, God calls us out of ourselves. We know this to be true. And He invites us into a true love, which is the love that He Himself provides. And I'm curious to know what it what you mean by love, because I understand the love of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God is a triune God. But what is love in your opinion, right? Because it would seem to me that perhaps you're inserting yourself into this definition of love, which is really transcendental, and and not fitting in this context.
I really now that you say that, I don't think it's obviously the love that I'm talking about is not on the level of the love that you are discussing.
Yeah. And, Timothy, that's pretty much how the conversation would pan out with a person. Obviously, if we're speaking about hot button topics, we're getting into abortion, same sex attraction, immigration, uh, teaching certain teachings in the classroom about gender ideology or DEI, something like this. We automatically find we unlock that fiery side of us, and it sometimes could be disastrous how carelessly we speak about things, right? And so the key here in discussing difficult topics is to, again, disengage the fight response. Um, Also disengage the flight, because you don't want to run away from these difficult conversations, but you want to step into it. You want to step into the mess, right? Because it gets ugly. It gets ugly when people disagree, but it doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be the case. Questions are key to unlocking shared understanding. And so it's, I think, a much healthier strategy to really look at the person that you're speaking to and realize like they have a story. They have a difficult time communicating it in the public sense, perhaps, but they have a story, and their lived experience is not without its value, and we have to recognize that. So asking questions leads to at least a common place of understanding, but in a way that is not defensive, because you are not having to defend your claims. Because if a person says, hey, I am in favor of abortion, or I am in favor of just opening the floodgates of LGBTQ in the church, that is a claim. And speaking to that really isn't accomplishing much until you understand what the person is actually trying to say. Because if you say, well, I'm in favor of abortion, you would ask a question like, well, you know, what do you mean by that? Because not everyone even understands the terms that are being um, spoken about. Do you really understand what abortion means? Do you really understand that the LGBTQ agenda entails a number of different struggles? Um, and this is really the idea here. When you find it difficult to speak to another person, and this is especially true, again, in the public sense. Um, a one-on-one conversation in the comfort of your home, that looks a lot different than what the likes of Charlie Kirk are doing. They're stepping into battlegrounds, just people ready to berate them with all kinds of negativity, and that's tough. It's not easy to just have a sit down conversation that looks more relaxed and laid back and feels more personal and personable. But it's still important, I think, to ask the difficult question of ourselves, right? Are we prepared to be truly humane with a person who may not even be themselves? You
And
know,
not
at,
only that,
Go ahead.
but I think that it's also important to not compromise because
Yes.
we may feel that in the middle of the conversation, we may feel that if we don't, if we lower what we're trying to say, if we're, because what we want to say is truth, right? But
Hmm.
if we feel that, if we're in the middle of the conversation, we feel that, oh, well, if I say that, they're going to disagree and they're just going to just stop listening, And so you may water down what you want to say,
Right.
but we don't want to do that. And I think that is also important
It is.
important
It
to
is.
not do.
Because you do have your, fight personality, the person who is forward. Then you have your flight personality, the person who is more analytical, he takes a step back approach. And then you have your accommodating personality. And there's something great about accommodating to another person, especially that which you disagree with. But like you say, there is a tendency to compromise, and not all things are worthy of compromise. And so you can actually say what you mean in an unapologetic way without, berating another person, or without making them feel like they've been completely, neglected or unseen, because that's what happens a lot of the time. You get two people or a larger group together with different uh, different lived experiences, right? And their conflicting ideas are just not communicated effectively at all, and it's like a shouting match. And the one person in the room that is, the ultra aggro liberal person is completely at odds with the ultra aggro um, conservative. And then it's like, we're the two people in the room are formulating their next thought without really listening to what the other is saying. And so um, that doesn't mean that you have to all of a sudden change up what you believe, but in a difficult conversation like the one about the same-sex attracted couple, you would say something like, while I understand that this is something that is a reality in your life at present moment, I I'm a believer in, the triune God, and according to the teachings of his church, living out this lifestyle is not carrying the cross and following Jesus Christ. It is instead giving into the pleasures of the world, and perhaps even falling into sin, and that is not leading us closer to Christ. And so while I while I recognize that this is a difficult situation you find yourself in, I have to tell you that you and I are are not in agreement about this, and I would invite you to pray for this particular cause, and it could be personal, it
Hmm.
could be for another person, because that happens also. You have a lot of allies, people who develop a worldview based on the experience of another, and that other person who's important in their life could shape their understanding of something as important as, doctrinal belief in the Catholic Christian context, or what have you. And there's a real danger to disregarding what another person truly thinks and believes, because then again it's a shouting match, and there is no place for understanding. It's all too common. We see it on our social media feed with the roasts and the shutdowns. And again, I don't think that is really going to create solutions in our dark and desperate world. It's going to create, maybe, I don't
More
know,
tension.
more tension, but certainly impassioned citizens, and that's not a terrible thing, right? Because we have to learn to speak our convictions into the world that is in desperate need of good, true, and beautiful things, right? God Himself. But also, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be something that leads people away from what they actually believe. And here on your podcast, I know that you're a huge advocate for bringing America back to shape, and it is crucial to our to the survival of our nation that we communicate with our lives this beautiful reality that we have confidence in that which we believe because it is good, because it is true, because it is beautiful. And living that out in an attractive way and being careful not to, um, needlessly step on a person and belittle them. It really makes a difference because it proves to another that maybe they are in the wrong and they should consider what you're saying. Because if it's not something another person could receive, then there is no change my mind moment, right? It's just I walk away from the conversation feeling, uh, you know, maybe even like a victor when I really wasn't, and even more impassioned about like getting out there and yelling at people or making comments about those that I disagree with that are so far from the truth. It's not even funny. Um, Again, we see this in our world today, and brokenness is on full display, especially on social media. And we have to be careful not to give in, but to give of ourselves to the other, even if they're just not where we're at spiritually and emotionally.
Ruben, I thank you so much for helping us to understand how to have these conversations in a charitable manner, but also in a way that really helps people to be receptive to our views and what we have to say. And so I thank you so much, Ruben, and it's really good to have you on the podcast again.
It
And if
is.
you
It's
ever
a
want to
gift.
come on and discuss, things you see out in over there in California, just let me know. I'd love to talk about that with you.
Yes, prayers for California from our audience. We need to learn to communicate better here. Uh, there's a lot of hurt in our world, so pray for it and remember that remember that other people are in desperate need of our good and gracious God, and we could show his love to them through our actions, through our communication. And in doing so, we might even lead people to develop a more conservative worldview. So, again, thank you, Timothy. God bless you. God bless America. And yeah, excited to do any more talking about making connections and leading people to the truth.